Tom Cruise shouted angrily as the doorbell rang. Damn it, who's knocking at this time? Because at that moment, he had carefully arranged all his ingredients in the kitchen of his Tribeca penthouse in New York, and he was about to start rolling out the dough. He always made sure the kitchen counter was spotless before he began. He would prepare all the ingredients in advance and arrange them neatly in different containers on the counter. Then he would start cooking. That evening, everything had to be even more perfect, because he was going to tell S.A.R that he wanted to get serious about their relationship. Tom was cooking at his place, hoping to impress her. He was going to make a beef pizza from dough he rolled out himself, and he had specially bought a Napa Valley wine. With that gesture, he hoped to touch S.A.R.'s Californian heart. He had already laid a freshly ironed tablecloth and carefully set the table, because once he started cooking, all he wanted was to concentrate on the food. The meal had to be perfect. S.A.R was 39 years old at the time, a true icon with her style, beauty, and personality. Tom was 23 years old. He was at the start of his career. He had gained nationwide fame with risky business, but he wasn't a star yet. They met at Sean Penn and Madonna's wedding and had been hanging out for a while. However, Tom wanted more. He had decided to tell her openly that evening. The shooting of Top Gun was set to begin in a few days. He wanted to clear his mind of doubts to focus entirely on his work, and he didn't want to drift away from her since they wouldn't be able to see each other properly. He had planned everything perfectly. The moment S.A.R walked in, he would take the pizza out of the oven. It would fill the place with a great smell, and he would start playing a Frank Sinatra record that S.A.R loved. When he opened the door, he would smile at her in his coolest jeans and navy shirt and seal the deal. The perfect plan. The only flaw was the inconsiderate person ringing the doorbell now. With his kitchen apron on and flour-covered hands, he rushed toward the door. He saw the flour from his hands lightly scattering on the floor, and his anger grew. "What is it?" he said as he opened the door. S.A.R was standing there. He was stunned. She was supposed to come an hour later. S.A.R saw him in his apron and laughed, saying, "Hello, chef," as she approached him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, pressed her body against his, and softly kissed his lips. S.A.R was wearing tight black jeans, a white blouse, and a black leather jacket. Everything matched perfectly with her voluminous curly hair and large hoop earrings. Without even saying hello, Tom asked, "Weren't you supposed to come an hour later?" S.A.R said, "Yes, chef, but on my way back from rehearsal, I realized I was nearby. I thought I'd skip going home. Is there a problem?" Tom smiled and said, "No, please come in." But nothing was going as planned. She wasn't supposed to see him in this outfit, and the music was supposed to be playing when she walked in. S.A.R walked in, looking around. The preparations she saw on the kitchen counter made her laugh even more. "What's on the menu, chef?" she asked. Tom replied, "Beef pizza." S.A.R nodded approvingly. Tom rushed to open the Napa Valley wine for her. As S.A.R took her first sip of wine, he put on the record and started the music. Then he quickly wiped up the flour that had spilled on the floor, and he washed his hands and started kneading the dough again. The dough needed to rest for a bit. He put it in a bowl and said, "I'll change and be right back." When he returned, S.A.R was sipping her wine and looking out at New York. Tom looked S.A.R up and down. Her legs, her hips, her entire body were flawless. But most importantly, she was incredibly charismatic. She had a fascinating aura. Even standing with her back turned, she completely captivated Tom. S.A.R sipping wine while looking at New York was like a movie scene to him. Even though he was renting, he still couldn't believe that this was his home and that this woman was here for him. When Tom returned, S.A.R turned and smiled at him. Tom smiled back and put his apron back on. He took the dough from the bowl, and his world came crashing down. The dough had turned into something like Play-Doh. It hadn't risen and was too dense. In his excitement, he had forgotten to add yeast to the dough. How could he make such a mistake? He already had nothing to offer this woman. This pizza was his only chance to impress her. His new film, Top Gun, was a very risky project. It might not even be watched. Plus, he still didn't feel ready to go on set next week. Would he be able to deliver the performance needed for the action scenes? If he didn't perform well, it would be the end of him. His career could go down. For a moment, he thought, why did I accept this role? Why did he need to take this risk? He was handsome. He could have had an average career playing romantic films. Cher sensed something was wrong. She turned to Tom and asked, "What's wrong, Tomcat?" With a fake smile, he said, "There's a slight problem with the dough. We're having wine-sauced meat for dinner." Cher took a deep breath and said, "Oh, thank God. I was wondering how to tell you. I'm on a crazy diet right now. I can't eat dough. Meat is perfect," she added. Of course. How could he not think of that? Making pizza for a woman this fit and beautiful was such a stupid idea. But he hadn't prepared enough to make wine-sauced meat either, had he? This woman already ate the best food at the best restaurants in the world. He needed to have practiced a meat dish to impress her, but there was nothing to be done. He took out his knives, he prepared his vegetables, he opened another bottle of wine. Meanwhile, Cher said, "By the way, I wish I could change out of this. Do you have anything I could wear?" Tom said, "1 second, you left a t-shirt here the other night. I'll grab it," and went inside. 20 seconds later, he was back with Cher's washed, ironed, and folded t-shirt. Cher took it and said, "I'll freshen up and be back." She went to the bathroom. Tom had 5 minutes to make everything perfect, and he did. When Cher returned, delicious smells were coming from the pan. He was waiting for her to put the meat in. He gave her the smile his risky business director had said, "Use this, it's very charming," and put the meat in the pan. And boom, the meat exploded in the pan like a bomb. He had turned the stove on too high. The entire kitchen was suddenly filled with smoke. Cher closed her eyes and went to open the windows. In a panic, Tom put the pan under the sink and turned on the water. There was more smoke coming out of the pan, and that was the end of it. The smoke set off the fire alarm. The alarm began to sound throughout the building. Tom had put out the pan. They opened the windows and left the apartment. Tom tried to calm the neighborhood and said, "This is no big deal," he said. But one of them had already called the fire department. The fire department arrived. They explained the situation to them. Once the fire department's checks were done, they went back inside. Both of them smelled smoked. The home looked like a war zone. But strangely, the Frank Sinatra record was still playing. Tom was about to start cleaning up when Cher calmly stopped. She took Tom's hand. She looked into his eyes and then said, "Come on, let's take a shower first." When they came out of the shower, Cher was in a great mood. "Now I'm hungry. Let's order pizza," she said. They got their pizza, sat on the couch in the messy living room, and turned on the TV. Thinking about what happened in the shower and this moment in front of the TV, Tom was certain of one thing. This was all Cher wanted. He was just one of the young, handsome actors Cher was hanging out with. What more could he offer her compared to the other handsome guys? It shouldn't be like this. He couldn't accept it. But for now, this was how it was. He wasn't going to get her completely. He gave up on proposing to get serious. Maybe if Top Gun is a hit, he thought. At that exact moment, Cher looked at Tom. She saw his thoughtful and unhappy expression. Tom turned to her. As Cher watched his face without saying anything, Tom was trying to figure out what was happening. Cher put her pizza back in the box, wiped her hand, and started caressing Tom's face. Tom smiled and asked, "What's up?" Cher said, "If it's okay with you, maybe I could stay here for a while." And their relationship got serious. In 2008, Cher gave an interview to Entertainment Tonight. In the interview, she talked about this evening, laughed about the smoke detector, and remembered Tom Cruise with these words. "Tom was a wonderful person. What drew me to him was his incredible kindness, thoughtfulness, and genuine effort that never gave up. It will always be one of the most special relationships for me." Tom Cruise didn't realize it that night, but he actually had a lot to offer Cher. It is still debated how much of these sides of him remained after he joined Scientology. Marcus Antonius learned from his counselor Quintus that Cleopatra's ship had arrived. He sheathed his sword, adjusted his armor, and said, "Let's go show this woman the true power of Rome." His only purpose was to claim authority over Cleopatra and take control of Egypt's abundant resources. He walked confidently out of his tent by the dock, but he froze, staring at the golden ship gliding on the Cydnus River. Purple sails fluttered gently in the breeze, and as the ship approached, the scent of incense drifted to Marcus Antonius's nose. The ship docked and a woman stepped off. She began walking alone with confident strength. She wore a silk dress. As she walked, her legs slipped out from the dress. Golden earrings in her ears, golden bracelets on her arms. And with her brown hair, she advanced toward Marcus. Wow, Caesar knew something, he thought to himself. The woman from the boat was on her knees in front of Marcus. Marcus Antonius had already won a victory. He stood tall, waiting for the Egyptian queen kneeling at his feet to speak. The woman said, "Greetings to the Lord of Rome from Queen Cleopatra." And it was then that Marcus realized that this woman was only Cleopatra's messenger. The year was 41 before the Common Era. It had been 2 years since Julius Caesar had been assassinated. The Roman Republic was going through a very turbulent time. Marcus Antonius, one of Caesar's greatest generals, ruled Rome alongside Caesar's son, Octavian and Lepidus. Marcus was responsible for the eastern provinces, but of course, his ambition was to rule Rome alone. That's why he wanted to secure Cleopatra and Egypt as loyal allies. His goal was to control Egypt's grain resources and wealth, because Rome was dependent on Egypt's grain. If Cleopatra established her authority, she could pressure Rome to ascend the throne. Marcus was 42 years old at the time, charismatic, slightly graying, a muscular Roman soldier. Cleopatra was 28. Her beauty was legendary worldwide. She spoke 9 languages, and she was a strategic genius. And of course, she wanted to maintain her independence. For her, the best plan was to remain outwardly loyal to Rome while ruling as queen internally, as she did under Caesar. She had convinced Caesar of this because she had shared one of history's greatest love stories with him, and she had given birth to a sweet boy, Caesarion. But after Caesar's death, the threat of civil war in Egypt had resurfaced. Cleopatra also had to protect herself from Caesar's other son, Octavian. He might not want Egypt's independence and could turn it into a province. Worse, he might see Cleopatra's son by Caesar, Caesarion, as a threat to his power and harm him. Cleopatra didn't have an army strong enough to protect herself against these threats. Rome provided that protection. Egypt gave Rome grain and wealth. In return, Rome put its strong men to work for them. Marcus knew full well that Cleopatra needed him and couldn't resist the Roman army. So he invited Cleopatra to his headquarters in Tarsus to show his authority. But so far, he had only seen Cleopatra's messenger. The messenger continued speaking. "Great Marcus Antonius, my queen invites you aboard her ship. She wishes to host Rome with treasures of Egypt," she said. He had set up this tent and this shabby setting to make Cleopatra feel insignificant and gain the upper hand in negotiations. He would demand she acknowledge his authority, state that Egypt's grain resources were non-negotiable, and end the discussion. True soldier style. With Quintus and 10 trusted men, he began following the woman. They boarded the ship with confident steps. The ship was decorated with delicate designs, clearly the work of master artists, a grand table on the deck, and food Marcus had never seen before. The dancing women continued their performance, locking eyes with Marcus, smiling flirtatiously, but maintaining a certain distance. The messenger said, "Please, come in." On the deck, 6 women held peacock feather fans like a curtain. The messenger knelt. The women lifted the fans one by one, revealing Cleopatra on a golden throne. On a wide throne, she reclined with her legs stretched to the side, her entire body turned toward Marcus. She wore a silk purple dress, the same color as the ship's sails, that fitted her body and showed off her curves. As she reclined, her legs slipped out of the slit of her dress, revealing a tantalizing cleavage. She was barefoot. Her toenails and fingernails were painted red. Her skin was coated with a curious paint. It both revealed her tanned skin and made it shimmer as if covered with millions of stars. Her dress was open down to her chest, but a necklace made of hundreds of emeralds covered it. On her head was a delicate, ornate crown made of shining diamonds, adorned with a snake symbol. Wavy wig hair cascaded from under the crown onto her shoulders, just like the hair of Aphrodite that Marcus had read about in books. Red lipstick on her lips, kohl around her eyes. Cleopatra gazed at Marcus Antonius from her reclining position with those kohl-lined eyes and said in a voice so deep, almost otherworldly, "Welcome, Lord of Rome." Marcus thought, yes, Caesar was absolutely right. Starting from her ankles, his gaze traveled up her legs and over Cleopatra's entire body. Finally, he stopped in her eyes. "I'm pleased to be here," he replied, and immediately continued. "I'm conveying Rome's terms, your grain resources." But Cleopatra raised 2 fingers toward him, gently stopping him. Marcus fell silent and furrowed his brow. Cleopatra said in the same goddess-like voice, "I have brought wine so ancient and rare that even the last 3 rulers of Egypt have never tasted them. If we start talking before drinking, it will bring bad luck to our alliance." And she glided up and began to walk. Marcus Antonius was actually going to object to the idea of the feast. He absolutely wouldn't let this serpent of a woman sway him like she did Caesar. This woman would first give him what he wanted, and only then, if necessary, would they eat and drink. But as he watched Cleopatra's gliding figure, he realized he had forgotten all of that. Cleopatra's voice, 3 steps ahead, saying, "Please, let's move to the table," snapped him back to reality. "Anyway, I'll get to the point at the table. No problem," he thought. And when he saw the table arrangement, his mood lifted, because they had reserved the head of the table for him, like a true ruler. Cleopatra didn't sit across from the throne set for Marcus Antonius, but beside him. Marcus settled at the head of the table. Cleopatra turned to the servant waiting at the head of the table, winked once, and food and wine began arriving. The head servant brought a jug and bowed before Marcus, filling his glass with wine. Meanwhile, Cleopatra gazed into his eyes with her full presence. She wasn't speaking, she was just looking. The servant poured the same wine for Cleopatra after Marcus. Cleopatra raised her glass and, in that same goddess-like voice, said, "To mighty Rome and the unparalleled commander, Marcus Antonius." Marcus raised his glass. He was waiting for Cleopatra to drink first. He was trying to project the image of, "If you're trying to poison me, those tricks won't work on me, darling." Cleopatra understood the unease in his gaze. First, she took a sip from her own glass. Marcus wasn't sure if she drank. Then she pointed to Marcus's wine, asking for permission. She curved the back of her hand into an oval shape. She poured the wine over her hand and, locking eyes with Marcus, sipped the wine from her hand with her red lipsticked lips. A lipstick mark appeared on her hand. Marcus's body trembled and a stirring began in his groin. He pulled himself together and spoke again. "First, I want to discuss your grain resources." But Cleopatra leaned toward him. The neckline of her dress opened a bit more. Marcus's eyes snapped to it. At the same time, she touched his arm with her hand. Her hands, her touch, were smooth. "Please allow me. Egypt's finest artists have been preparing for months, just for the great Marcus Antonius. Let them show you their skills," she said. Marcus fell silent and leaned back. He took his first sip of wine. What a taste. This must be the wine flowing from the rivers of paradise. Cleopatra winked at someone else, and the show began. A magician appeared directly across from where Marcus was seated. Meanwhile, Cleopatra made another gesture, and her throne was moved next to Marcus. Marcus found it a bit strange, but couldn't resist. The 2 rulers sat side by side, watching the magician perform various tricks. Fire performers surrounded the magician. Sometimes they breathed fire, other times they twirled flaming batons, creating a stage effect. The magician also had comedic tricks. During one of these funny tricks, Marcus laughed. As he laughed, Cleopatra laughed too and placed her hand on Marcus's leg, and she didn't pull it back. While the magician captivated Marcus's mind, Cleopatra slowly caressed the inside of his leg. Marcus's hands were now trembling. He was barely holding himself together. The magician turned to the Marcus and asked if he might bring his queen forward for their final act. Cleopatra went to the magician's side. The magician began wrapping a cloth around her. Cleopatra followed the cloth with her eyes while stealing glances at Marcus. Finally, the magician brought the cloth in front of Cleopatra, completely covering her. Marcus could no longer see Cleopatra. The magician let go of the cloth, and hocus pocus, Cleopatra was gone. At that moment, the music suddenly stopped. Marcus was stunned. The soldiers' mouths hung open. They looked around aimlessly. At that moment, another woman came and whispered in Marcus Antonius's ear, "Sir, our queen awaits you inside to discuss the terms of the alliance." Marcus and Quintus looked at each other. Marcus was torn between curiosity about Cleopatra's next surprise and fear of an assassination. But his libido pushed him forward without hesitation. He got up from the table and followed the woman to the place where she was leading him. The woman bowed her head as she opened the door to the ship's main cabin. Inside, Cleopatra, adorned with jewels but without her dress, lay gazing at Marcus with her coal-lined eyes. Her entire body shimmered. As the sun rose, Quintus was watching it from the deck. He hadn't noticed his commander approaching from behind. Suddenly, he felt a hand on his shoulder and, startled, turned to see Marcus Antonius looking at the sun with him. Marcus Antonius said, "Here's the plan, Quintus. Inform my wife. I'll spend this winter in Alexandria. We'll discuss the alliance details there at length, but Egypt will manage its own grain resources and wealth, and we'll support them with all our military might." That winter in Alexandria, Marcus Antonius fell in love with Cleopatra. A few years later, they married. They had twins. From the start of this relationship, Octavian was furious with Marcus Antonius. He launched a propaganda machine against him in Rome. Their disputes grew, and they finally faced off in the Battle of Actium. Marcus and Cleopatra were defeated by Octavian, and together in Alexandria, they ended their lives. On the morning of 8th November 1939, in her Manhattan hotel room, Coco Chanel tries to open her eyes at the sound of a voice saying, "Wake up, Gabrielle," but fails. The woman's voice feels like a dream. How dare the room service wake her up? How dare they call her Gabrielle? How sincere is this? What happened to Madame Chanel? The moment she can open her eyes, she'll show them. But right now, that doesn't seem possible. 1 second. Why would room service call her Gabrielle? The moment she realizes this, the voice suddenly starts to sound familiar. She strained to lift her eyes, as if she were lifting a 500-kilogram barbell. The person in front of her was Salvador Dali's wife. Involuntarily asked, "Gala, what are you doing here?" Gala, with a sarcastic tone, said, "I was about to ask you the same question." Chanel looked around. The first thing she saw was a canvas in front of her with a Dali drawing on it. She scanned the room and realized she had woken up on a sofa in Salvador Dali's room. In 1938, Salvador Dali wanted to create a surrealist ballet, and he wrote a script adapting Wagner's Tannhäuser opera. The play was called Bacchanal. Dali also took on the costume and set design for the play. He was 35 at the time and at the top of his career. His fame had already reached America, but he wanted to make a name for himself in America. That's why having Bacchanale performed in New York was so important to him. But there was a problem. The surreal costumes he designed were almost impossible to bring to life. This is where Chanel stepped in. At that time, Chanel was 56 years old and a living legend, both a fashion icon and the owner of the world's most famous perfume brand, Chanel No. 5. However, she had a particular interest in this young painter she knew from Paris. That's why she personally took on the task of bringing the costumes to life. Despite leading one of the globe's largest companies, Chanel always stayed connected to sewing and fabrics. She was still very talented. She created wonders with the costumes. Moreover, her doing this as Coco Chanel, dedicating time to it, was both a great favor and incredibly good publicity for Dali's career. Dali's wife, Gala, whom he called my muse, the meaning of my life, was 45 years old. She managed his business affairs. Coco Chanel was a priceless opportunity for her. That's why she couldn't react strongly when she found her in her husband's room. But at that moment, Chanel didn't know what to say to Gala. That day was the premiere of the play. That was the first thing Gala saw when she arrived in New York from Paris for the premiere. Coco Chanel sleeping in her husband's room. Chanel loved Gala dearly. She never wanted her to suspect anything between her and her husband. After all, she was Coco Chanel. She was famous for never losing control. She couldn't say, I had a little too much to drink last night and something happened with your husband, but it's the premiere today, so just let it go. Yes, there's the premiere. What a thrill. With this excitement, as she did every morning when she first woke up, her hand reached for a cigarette. Meanwhile, she glanced around. The room was a mess. Dali's paintbrushes were scattered on the floor. On the coffee table in front of the sofa where Chanel was lying, there was an empty whiskey bottle, 3 whiskey glasses, an upside-down champagne bottle in an ice bucket, and 2 wine glasses. They weren't alone in the room. That was good, but at that moment, she noticed what she was wearing. She was wearing Dali's silk robe with a mustache pattern. She panicked instantly. She asked Gala, who was standing in front of her, "Where's Salvador?" Gala said, "I don't know, he's not in the room. I thought you might know." Chanel saw an ashtray and her pearl necklace right under the sofa. Despite all this disaster, she was thrilled not to have lost the necklace. She sat up from where she was lying and settled on the sofa. She took out a cigarette. She looked for a light on the coffee table and saw the remains of a banned substance. Yes. Now she began to remember the night. After a successful dress rehearsal the previous evening, Dali had said, "Let's celebrate." Chanel thought, why not? She was so exhausted that the idea of having a glass of whiskey to relax sounded wonderful. Besides, it was always impossible to refuse Salvador Dali's invitations, because every moment with him was full of surprises. You always regretted it when you said, "What could I possibly miss?" They went to Dali's room with 3 people from the costume and lighting crew. Chanel only wanted a glass of whiskey. Then she'd go to her room and do her beauty routine to look fabulous for the premiere the next day. That was it. The crew members, who were much younger than her, had boundless energy. Plus, spending an evening with Salvador Dali and Coco Chanel was priceless for them. Fueled by the young crew's high energy, Dali went completely crazy. At one point, he said, "Let's do another rehearsal," and began to perform the play from beginning to end in a hilariously surreal way, making strange noises, imitating animals, and declaring, "Look, I'm gonna be a cello now." The mood was incredibly high among the entire crew. Chanel kept saying, "This is my last whiskey," but it wasn't happening, and at some point, someone from the crew pulled out a banned substance. Chanel said, "No," but she only said no twice. When it was offered a third time, she rolled on the floor laughing at Dali and, caught off guard, said, "Why not?" and accepted, and then things spiraled out of control. Now Chanel had only one mystery to solve. Why had she taken off her dress? Oh, and also, how did she end up wearing Dali's robe? And of course, where was Dali? And what was she going to say to his wife right now? And, most importantly, how was she going to fix her hungover, puffy face before the premiere? She turned to Gala and said, "I don't remember much, Gala, The last thing I recall is having a little celebration with the crew." She looked angry at Chanel, but still wasn't doing anything without being sure something had happened. Or maybe she was just waiting for the premiere to be over. Or perhaps she didn't have the courage to say anything to Coco Chanel, but was certain to take it out on her husband. While Chanel was lost in thought, Gala went to the bedroom, and she returned even angrier. She looked at Chanel and said, "By the way, your dress is in there if you want to get it." Chanel's eyes widened. She walked nervously to Dali's bedroom. The black dress she wore the night before was lying on the floor by the bed. At that moment, there was no image that came to her mind, but there was a feeling. While under the influence of the banned substance, a hand slowly slips off the strap of her dress, the dress sliding down her body to the floor, and an overwhelming erotic thrill from that moment on. There was no doubt anymore. Something had definitely happened that night. With her black dress in front of her and the pressure of Dali's wife behind her, she started to think. At that moment, the reality of having experienced something with Dali also pleased her. This feeling touched something in her. Seriously? One fling in 40 years, and I don't even get to remember it. Just perfect. She thought. Why did this happen last night? Dali had stayed at Chanel's summer villa for days the previous year, and nothing had happened. However, she had to admit that she had always been interested in Dali. Wow, even admitting it to herself felt good. She had always held back because she loved Gala so much. But oh, that banned substance. Most likely, she couldn't hold back her passions any longer. But yes, she loved Gala dearly. They had a professional relationship, not close friendship. But she always found her very noble. Now, would she turn around, look into her eyes, and lie? Or would she confess? Confess what? She didn't remember anything. So she could tell her the truth. I don't remember. Well, partly the truth. Because she couldn't say, "Your husband undressed me. Ask him for the rest." She nervously picked up her dress from the floor, and a piece of paper fell out of her dress. Dali had drawn a perfume bottle with a mustache and written a note underneath. "To Gabrielle, the woman of my unforgettable nights." Chanel's heart started pounding. This was so romantic. As you might guess, the perfume bottle represented Chanel, and the mustache represented Dali. She couldn't show this note to Gala right now. It wasn't the time, aside from being too hungover to deal with this right now. That day was the premiere. She couldn't afford any scandal or the slightest distraction for the team. But she had made her decision. No matter what, she would stand by her feelings for Dali. Chanel had a very dramatic love life. She had lost the love of her life, her first investor, her light, Arthur Boy Capel, in a tragic car accident in 1919. Since that day, she had lovers, experienced romances, but in the end, she always chose solitude. Before each man, she thought maybe this one wouldn't end in loneliness. She thought the same about Dali. Besides, she hadn't had this much fun with any lover since Arthur. People also thought they were a great match. High society had buzzed with, "Are Dali and Chanel together?" Gossips multiple times. She didn't know how she'd explain it to her, but Coco Chanel, who didn't chase her passions, was unthinkable. She folded the drawing and hid it in her palm, and she went to Gala. "I guess I passed out early last night," she said. Gala was now thoroughly angry. "I'm going to ask you this once, Gabrielle, and I promise, whatever the answer, it won't affect our work." "You know what I'm going to ask," she said. Chanel thought to herself, well, if it won't affect our work, I might as well say it. She lost some respect for her, yet in another way, she respected her even more. How awful to lose the man she loves to other women for the sake of work. But how admirable to be willing to lose the man she loves for the sake of work, she thought. "I really don't remember anything, Gala. I can't lie to you," she said, lying to Gala. "Let's call the reception. Maybe they know where he is," she said. She picked up the phone and called the reception. "Hello, this is Chanel. Do you know where Mr. Dali is?" she said. "Madam, he left the hotel late last night with Ms. Brown," came the reply. Chanel's mood crashed. What? How could he leave with another woman? And with Chanel's assistant, no less. How could he leave her alone on this sofa? How could he do this to her? And when he had the chance to sleep with Coco Chanel, he chose a simple costume assistant and her third-rate hotel room. Why had he invited that woman to this special celebration? What was the point? It was absurd to feel these emotions next to Dali's wife before she even had time to process her anger. But this jealousy she felt had only one meaning. She was in love. She decided to tell her the truth. She closed the phone and, with a serious expression, said, "Salvador left the hotel late last night with our costume assistant friend." Suddenly, she felt the relief of shifting the blame onto someone else. Now, the enemy was another woman. Chanel smiled faintly to herself. Out of nowhere, she had admitted her love for Dali to herself. For no reason at all. But was there really no reason? Then why had Chanel undressed? Was Salvador so flirtatious that he spent intimate moments with her and left with another woman? And if something had happened between them, was the assistant there too? The only way to solve these mysteries was to find Dali. Gala's mind was in a total mess. A naked Chanel, an assistant who took her husband away in the middle of the night, and a mad genius husband. She didn't know what to do with all this. Chanel looked at the clock. It was 11 o'clock. She pulled herself together and said, "All right, let's go to the theater. There's a costume rehearsal at 12. He'll surely show up." Gala gathered her courage and shouted, "If this ends with things I don't want coming to light, I'll make you all regret it, Gabrielle. Know that." Chanel was furious. No one could threaten Coco Chanel. First, you control your husband who flirts with assistants, then you act like this in front of Coco Chanel. You're going to regret these things and apologize. She threw a completely empty threat at her, but it worked. She calmed down. Chanel thought, if it turns out I had a fling, I'll be even more humiliated by this threat, but oh well. They agreed to meet downstairs in half an hour and parted ways. Then they met and went to the theater in Chanel's Rolls Royce. When they arrived at the theater, their fears had come true. Dali was nowhere to be found. People had gathered. The dancers were warming up on stage. The director was frantically shouting around. Chanel thought, "What? He left me alone, but stayed with that bitch until this hour?" And got angry. She felt abandoned. Yet another man had disappointed her. "I go on with my loneliness," she thought. At that moment, the face she saw in front of her hit her like a car. Her assistant, Marie Brown, was there fixing the costumes. Chanel turned to Gala and said, "That's the girl they mentioned." At that moment, Marie saw them, and she started approaching them with great excitement. There was neither guilt nor worry on her face upon seeing them. "Welcome, Madame Chanel. I've arranged all the costumes. You can start the rehearsal," she said. Chanel was stunned. She didn't know how to act toward her. Have you seen Salvador?" she asked. "No, madam. The last time I saw him was after I put you to bed last night. I dropped him off here at the theater. But I haven't seen him this morning yet," she said. "What do you mean, after putting me to bed?" "When you wanted to sleep, I changed your clothes and put you on the sofa. I was going to take you to your room, but you said you weren't up for it. Then, as I was going back to the hotel, Mr. Salvador asked me to drop him off here by taxi. By the way, madam, it really was the best night of my life. I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much," she said. Chanel was devastated. The day that started with her thinking, "How did I have such a fling?" ended with her saying, "Ugh, why didn't I have such a fling?" Also, the memory of her dress being slowly taken off still gave her goosebumps. Had the most erotic moment she'd experienced in a long time been with her assistant? Gala leaned toward Chanel's ear and said, "I'm so sorry, Gabrielle." Chanel nodded with her eyes. Just then, from behind, Salvador Dali shouted, "Good morning!" The most fascinating women in the universe, illuminating the entire hall with their beauty and filling us with inspiration. He was wearing his pajamas. Gala rolled her eyes and said, "Where have you been, Salvador? We've been looking for you all morning." He put a passionate kiss on her lips and said, "I'm here, my inspiration. I thought sleeping here last night would let my surreal cosmic energy fully permeate the stage. Chanel started laughing. The bitterness inside her was still there. What could she do? She just couldn't resist. This man was so charming. He turned to Chanel and shouted in her face, "How's my partner in crime?" and kissed her on the cheek. Chanel said, "How are you so alert?" "I'm wrecked after last night." Dali said, "I didn't drink anything last night." Chanel racked her brain and realized she couldn't recall a single moment when he'd held a drink. "What about the drugs?" she whispered. "Drugs? I've never taken them in my life. I'm Salvador Dali. I don't need drugs. I am the drug," he replied enthusiastically. As Chanel laughed at him, he continued, "I drew a picture of us last night. Did you see it? I think after this night, we could sell it for $1 million, he said. Chanel thought and said, "Oh, really?" "I didn't see it. It must have gotten lost last night, Salvador." He shouted, "No matter, we'll draw it again," and jumped into stage preparations in his pajamas. The premiere was wonderful. The press wrote, "Even Wagner couldn't have imagined this madness." The art world declared, "Dali is a genius." The fashion world was in awe of Chanel and said the costumes were a new breath in fashion. But that night, Coco Chanel went to sleep alone, looking at the drawing Salvador Dali had made for her. The year is 1938. Simone de Beauvoir excitedly adjusted her hair in the restroom of Le Select, one of her favorite spots in Paris nightlife. She looked at herself from head to toe in the mirror. She liked what she saw. "I'm ready," she said. At tonight's Jean Sablon concert, she unexpectedly ran into Olga. Olga Kosakiewicz was Simone's beautiful former student, with whom she had been in a relationship for a few years. Since starting university, Olga had maintained both a romantic relationship and a friendship with her. However, since Olga began modeling, she became a sought-after name in Paris. All the painters were after her. That's why they hadn't been seeing each other much lately. It was the perfect time to passionately make up for it. Simone had come to the concert with S.A.R. She thought she wished she hadn't come with him. It had been nearly 10 years since she started an open relationship with S.A.R, but she was still more comfortable when he wasn't around. She was also aware of S.A.R's obsession with Olga. He persistently tried his luck every time he saw her, but Olga was not responding to him. She took a deep breath like a young lover and stepped out of the bathroom. She imagined going up and kissing Olga without saying a word. This heightened her libido. She proceeded from the restroom corridor into the venue, and the blood rushed to her head. S.A.R was signing his new book, The Brilliant and Provocative Nausea, with that disgusting and fake grin he gets when he just wants to take a beautiful, young woman home. For Olga. He was sitting at the bar with his legs crossed. His head was among the smoke of his pipe. He had leaned forward to sign, but was slyly grinning at Olga while glancing up with his eyes. Simone had fire in her eyes, her eyebrows furrowed. How does he think he can win over such a beautiful woman, considering how short he is? I couldn't make him understand that with his hair plastered to the side, he looks like a kid. He claims he wrote this book for existentialism, but I'm sure his real motivation is hitting on women. "Even if you write 20 more books, I won't let you take Olga from me, you womanizer," she started thinking to herself. Then she felt a bit ashamed. All of this was within the boundaries of her open relationship with S.A.R. She shouldn't behave this way. She took a deep breath and calmed down. There is an important detail at this point. Just as S.A.R is free to pursue Olga, Simone is also free not to lose Olga. With a flirtatious smile on her face, she walked towards them. S.A.R was sitting at the bar. Olga stood across from him. Her blonde, wavy hair and red lipstick looked very, very attractive. She gently stroked Olga's arm and placed her hand on her shoulder. Even though she had known Olga for years, the same thing always happened after not seeing her for a long time. As soon as her hand touched her skin, a tightness began in the middle of her chest, and her heart beat faster. S.A.R turned to Simone and, smiling irritatingly, said, "Welcome, my beaver." He would call Simone that way. Then he turned to Olga and continued from where he left off. What I want to convey in the new book, blah, blah, blah. Simone was still angry with him. She had no right to be angry, but she was angry. The bartender made eye contact with Simone. He signaled with his hand and made a question mark with his eyes, asking, "Would you like another glass of wine?" Simone nodded with his eyes. While waiting for the wine, Sartre continued to praise himself and his book. This connection had such a big impact that Sartre didn't know what to do with this ego. He was telling every young woman he met about his book and success. But Simone felt this for the first time. At that moment, she realized something and was stunned. Shouldn't Sartre be the one who should be really jealous between these two? She was really more jealous of Olga than Sartre, who was her life partner. This means she really liked Olga a lot. She thought to herself that Sartre believed he could cover his ugliness with his fame. But suddenly, things changed dramatically. Olga was leaning dangerously towards him, laughing loudly despite Sartre's bad jokes. Simone knew this was her way of flirting. Her anger turned to Olga. What does she mean? Was she going to Sartre tonight just because he was famous? Was Olga such a fame seeker? How could she do this? Did she forget what she did for her in school? They already see each other very rarely. Would they miss this opportunity? Simone could no longer hide her discomfort. Fortunately, just at that moment, the wine arrived. She took her wine and raised her glass, saying, "Another beautiful night in Paris, to freedom." Olga raised her glass and said, "Yes, to freedom." Then she added, "You see, they say war is at our doorstep. This might be one of our last free nights in Paris." Sartre immediately chimed in, "You never know what that madman Hitler will do. But don't worry, darling. Paris will always be free. Even if not its streets, its spirit will be." Simone thought, what a silly thing to say. At that moment, Olga slowly ran her hand along Simone's back and hugged her tightly. "So, Sartre, tell me, how much of writing such a big and successful book is due to being with this wonderful woman?" she said, and gave a small kiss on Simone's cheek. Simone couldn't stop her smile that was coming with excitement and happiness, and giggled like a little girl. Sartre began praising Simone, saying, "Of course, the greatest credit goes to her. Without her, I wouldn't be where I am intellectually or in life." Simone's heart had softened a bit, but it was short-lived. When Sartre finished praising Simone, Olga said, "Oh, you're so sweet, Sartre," and gently caressed Sartre's arm, not in a simple way either. First, she moved her hand from his elbow to his wrist. Then, with her hand on his wrist, she continued to stroke his arm with her finger. Simone was losing her patience. What was he trying to do? It was time to pick a side. Who does she want? If she wanted something with Sartre, if that damn book served its purpose, Simone could just go home without wasting time. But if she wanted Simone, why was she acting like that with Sartre? Did she want both of them together? Simone had told her this before. They weren't with someone else at the same time as Sartre. She knew this very well. So what were these actions then? Right now, she wanted to shout this in her face. But she shouldn't do that. Because according to Simone, true love was respecting her lover's freedom. She was sure of this. But then why couldn't she stop feeling this way? She thought it didn't matter. In this bar, where all of Paris's intellectuals gathered, she couldn't allow herself to say, the Simone de Beauvoir, who has praised open relationships for years, had a jealousy crisis. She took a deep breath. She couldn't speak from anger, but at least she wasn't causing a scene. Sometimes, that was enough. Taking advantage of her silence, Sartre became even more animated. He was explaining his theories about what Hitler might do and adding jokes to make Olga laugh. Olga still stood hugging Simone, gently stroking her waist, but at the same time, she kept laughing at Sartre's bad jokes. Sartre went on the offensive. He kept talking non-stop. Simone was just throwing fake smiles around and imagining the minutes she wanted to spend with Olga at night. The bartender shouted last drinks. They ordered one more wine each. It was almost over now. Even if Olga went with Sartre, at least this torture of uncertainty would end. Then, something unexpected happened. The journalist friend of Sartre, Jacques-Laurent Bost, whom they met earlier in the night, was still in the venue. He was smoking his cigarette staring at her. Simone had always found Bost very attractive, but at first she wasn't sure. Was he really looking at her? She looked away from him. She returned to the conversation. Sartre was drunk. He was both drunk on alcohol and triumphantly drunk, confident that he had now won over Olga. Simone returned to Bost again to be sure. They stared at each other for a few seconds. Simone was sure. Bost was looking at her. She turned her head, but was in a great mood. She was back in the game. Even if Olga went with Sartre tonight, she still had Bost. Also, Sartre's friend was a great opportunity to take revenge on him. She shouldn't have thought that way. She had no right to take revenge on Sartre. She tried to forget this thought, yet she couldn't help but think about the pleasure she would get if it happened. Bost or Olga, what an amazing evening. Finally, Bost smiled at her. Simone's heart raced again. She responded with a smile. Sartre saw this smile, and when he turned around to see who it was, he saw Bost too. It was obvious he was a bit upset, but still, his only focus was Olga at the moment. Just as Sartre was about to speak again, the bartender shouted, "We're closing now." They looked at each other and took the last sip of their drinks. They turned to Olga with expectant eyes. Bost got up from his seat and came over to them, shouting, "Good night, everyone." Simone started imagining scenarios in her head. What would she do if Bost made her an offer? Was she going to leave Olga here with Sartre? But what if, after saying no to Bost's offer, Olga went with Sartre? What would she do then? She couldn't stay in this situation. If an offer came from Bost, she should accept it. But she wanted Olga very much. What did she have to do? Bost asked out loud with his big voice. It was a nice evening, right? Then, without waiting for an answer, he continued talking to himself. Jean Sablon is currently the most talented musician in Paris. I still can't believe he uses a microphone while singing on stage. Incredibly creative. Sartre said yes, he was amazing, but let's discuss sometime whether he's the most talented musician. Bost said, "It's all right, Sartre, my friend," and turned to Olga, saying, "Olga, dear, would you like to accompany me on the way home?" he asked. What? Simone was dumbfounded. Sartre's face showed a mix of anger and confusion. The man who said that to love someone is not to own them was showing his fear of losing the woman he had with every expression. Simone was embarrassed. How could she not realize that Bost was looking at Olga instead of her? She was very angry with Olga. Why did all the men like her? Why did she have to flirt with all of them? She tried to calm herself. These feelings she was experiencing were contrary to everything she stood for. She couldn't give in to these feelings. Without a moment of hesitation, Olga responded to Bost's offer with great pleasure. "Of course I'd love to, darling." Anger had turned into astonishment. How could this be? Was it so easy to achieve her? Or was this not the first time for them? Olga gave a kiss on the cheek to Sartre and Simone and took Bost's arm. Bost shouted, "Good night, friends," and they left together. Sartre and Simone looked at each other. They were left alone among the empty tables. Both started laughing. Simone said a sentence that was extremely nonsensical, but strangely summarized their situation very well. Like, yes, freedom sometimes means foolishness. Sartre laughed. "At least let me find a taxi so I can be useful," he said. Simone laughed and replied, "Maybe you'll have a chance with the taxi driver." They actually lived in separate houses, but that night they went home together. The couple hadn't had such a passionate night in a long time. Jealousy seemed to have fueled the fire of their love. Exactly 7 years after this night, in 1945, Olga Kosakiewicz and Jacques-Laurent Bost got married. It is said that Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir, who attended the wedding, were in a very sour mood. The person you seek is not in distant lands, but sitting beside you, their heart a mirror of yours. Look closely, for love is hidden in the familiar. Keanu Reeves had randomly picked a book from the bookshelf. He had read a random page from the book, and these were the words that came out of his mouth. He had started reading this sentence in an extremely high-spirited mood, as if he were a motivational speaker. But as he finished reading, his voice was trembling with shock. Alexandra Grant couldn't hide her astonishment either. How could this be? By the way, the book was Rumi's selected poems. The year is 2017. Alexandra Grant, a multifaceted artist who combines her drawings with text, and the Keanu Reeves we all know, are working together in the office of their newly founded publishing house. They have a studio in Los Angeles with exposed brick walls and slightly elevated ceilings, transformed from a former book warehouse. They are in Alexandra's room. Her workspace is positioned right in front of a window that looks out over Los Angeles. It's covered with scattered sketches and drawings. There are 2 chairs in front of the desk. On the left side is a large bookshelf. Keanu has tossed his motorcycle helmet and jacket onto one of the chairs. Right in front of it is a very comfortable leather armchair. Alexandra is sitting in this armchair with her laptop. On the coffee table in front of her armchair are red wine glasses and a bottle. Alexandra Grant is working on her new book, The Artist's Prison. Keanu is helping her. The 2 are close friends, very close friends. Their paths first crossed in 2009 through their collaborative book, Ode to Happiness. A lovely book with texts written by Keanu and illustrations by Alexandra. After the book, they became friends, and after years of this friendship, they founded the Ex-Artist Books publishing house. The first release from the publishing house would be The Artist's Prison, featuring illustrations by Eve Wood and text by Alexandra. While trying to finalize the book, Alexandra had hit a creative block. At this point, she had asked Keanu for help. The 2 met one evening at the publishing house. They worked until it got dark. Then they opened the wine and continued working until dawn. And the next night, they did the same thing again. The night after that, again, and again. This was the 5th day they had met in the evening to work together. By now, their meetings felt more like fun times spent together than work. Because on one hand, they were talking about the book and texts, and on the other, they were laughing until morning and having a great time. That day too, it was past midnight. The second bottle of red wine was half finished, and they had hit a block at one point in the text. Keanu said, "I read somewhere, whenever you're stuck, pick a random book from the bookshelf and read the first sentence you open to." It said the answer is probably hidden in that sentence. They had created a small library at the publishing house, entirely based on their own tastes. Keanu got up and randomly picked a book from the bookshelf. Rumi, Selected Poems. He opened the book to the middle and began reading these words. "The person you seek is not in distant lands, but sitting beside you, their heart a mirror of yours. Look closely, for love is hidden in the familiar." Alexandra's breath caught and her eyes widened. Keanu's "the answer is hidden in the book" theory had worked, but in a different way. This sentence might not have answered their creative block. However, it definitely answered what they had been experiencing in this office for the past few days, and the thing Alexandra couldn't admit to herself. What was love? Of course, this is a huge question. It was hard to answer, but she was very sure of this. There were times when love revealed itself in a tangible way. For example, in college, while watching the sun set over the ocean, when you turned to the person next to you, the thing that passed between your eyes was love. Or while hanging out with a large group of friends, when the group's musician picked up their guitar and played an emotional song. The thing that emerged when you locked eyes for just a moment with the person sitting at the other end of the table, someone you always knew there was something with, was love. Or the sudden tension that came from picking a random book with the person you'd been having a great time and laughing with for 5 nights, and the acceleration that tension caused in your heartbeat was definitely love. In other words, love was in the room at that moment. It had arrived. It was almost tangible and solid enough to be seen with the eyes. The moment Alexandra understood this, her excitement turned into anxiety. They had recently established this publishing house. She couldn't risk this business for this feeling she was experiencing now, which she couldn't yet make sense of and didn't know if it was temporary. She had ideals. She could debate whether love or work was more important. What mattered most was that their friendship always came first. She couldn't risk Keanu's friendship. Or could she? Sure, friendship is great, but this is Keanu Reeves we're talking about. Let's say this thing didn't go anywhere, and something just happened here tonight. Wouldn't it be worth it? Keanu lifted his head from the book. They locked eyes with Alexandra. Sparks were flying between them. Alexandra realized that these words described their situation and that Keanu understood it too. The cheerful and high-spirited man from earlier was gone, replaced by a fragile and nervous romantic. Alexandra's excitement grew, and she smiled at him in a way that said, "Yes, I'm ready." She had done it without thinking. Inside, she was definitely not ready. She was full of fear, but her body and her little gestures had expressed what she truly wanted before she could. With the smile, Keanu became even more bewildered. He panicked and said, "This didn't work, I guess. Let's look at another book." Alexandra's smile slowly faded, and she closed both eyes for 2 seconds. Of course, he didn't want it. She knew about Keanu's tragic and extremely private love life. Keanu had lost his baby in 1999, and shortly after, in 2001, his girlfriend Jennifer in an unexpected traffic accident. He had completely closed himself off to relationships. Since then, he hadn't formed any attachments or had a serious relationship. Where had Alexandra gotten the idea that she could break through this? And she had almost made a move that would have risked everything. "Thank God I didn't do something like that," she thought. Meanwhile, Keanu turned back to the bookshelf and pulled out another book. The book he picked up was Allen Ginsberg's Kaddish and Other Poems. He opened to a random page and began reading. "If you love someone, don't let fear seal your lips." What? Alexandra was shocked. Keanu continued reading in a nervous, slightly raspy voice. The heart knows what the mind hesitates to accept. Friendship is a beautiful bond, but love is a fire that burns doubts. Speak now, for time does not wait for unspoken truths. Your words can turn a moment into eternity. Love is not a risk, but a revelation. Speak, and you will see the world anew. But this is too much now. You're going to make me a New Age spiritualist whether I like it or not. Alexandra thought to herself. She couldn't resist these words in any way. Ginsberg was right. Friendship was indeed a beautiful bond, but love, right now, was a fire burning doubts. She was now certain of what she wanted. She wanted to burn up in this fire. Suddenly, all the special moments they had shared over the past 5 nights, and Keanu's facial expressions in those moments, began flashing before her eyes. Sitting side by side, looking at the computer, him smiling at the texts Alexandra had written, then trying to write something together, realizing how bad it was and laughing at themselves. Late night, when they were drunk, abandoning work and laughing at a meaningless YouTube video for 10 minutes. What they felt when they hugged goodbye at dawn. Keanu's unfailing kindness. His unique soul. Yes, Alexandra was in love with her friend. There was nothing she could do. She was done for. After reading these lines, Keanu couldn't say anything. He stood there looking at the book, nervously moving his jaw. Since the page hadn't changed, he must have been rereading the same part. Keanu closed the book. He turned and looked at Alexandra first. He didn't say anything. He turned to the bookshelf and picked another random book. He slowly came and sat next to Alexandra. Keanu looked into Alexandra's eyes and then opened a random page from the Jack Kerouac book, On the Road, in his hand. When he began reading, these words came out of Reeves' mouth. "I love you, and I want to wander this world with you, our souls bound by the wild call of love. Come with me, let's make every moment our poetry. My heart beats for you, now and forever." He closed the book. He slowly leaned toward Alexandra, and the lips of the 2 old friends touched. The entire room had become love.